When the French voted against the constitution, it was one of the best organized discussions I have seen in a European country for a long, long time. In every town, every village in France, there was a discussion. And many, many popular groups participated and said, the thing we oppose in the European Constitution is where you say the economic system has to be neoliberal capitalism. That was the big, big opposition in France to that system, and it was totally ignored. They changed one or two sentences and pushed it through anyway. So there's a big democratic deficit inside the way this union functions, leaving aside its economic policies, that the parliament means absolutely nothing. The European Union is still determined by the large states, by the elites who run these large states, and they make the policies. Parliament has nothing to do with it. So how can such a system last indefinitely? I don't think it will.
So we have a question here.
Pozdrav. Postavit ću vam pitanje na hrvatskom temu. Imate slušalice. Mogao bih se složiti sa gotovo svime što ste rekli, svim točkama, poantiranjima, ali ima jedan veliki problem u prikazu, a to je paralelizacija, ako sam dobro razumio. Paralelizacija između dvaju tipova socijalizma, dakle ovoga klasičnog staroga u 20. stoljeću i ovih novih socijalističkih pokreta u Latinskoj Americi. Naime, ja bih se mogao složiti s time da je možda druga, treća, četvrta šansa za socijalizam koju ste rekli za Europu, da će to biti put Latinske Amerike i to bi mogao biti vrlo težak put. Neki kažu kao vaš prethodnik ovdje Žižek da bi to moglo biti put kroz grčku situaciju. Da bi mogao biti možda, da bi neki drugi dijelovi Europe mogli proći kroz sadašnje stanje Grčke, da bi se uopće došlo do nekakve perspektive. Ali, dakle, to bi mogao biti možda perspektiva i za Europu, ali o tome ne bi sad. Ono što mi je problematično i s čime nisam siguran da sam dobro razumio, jeste sljedeće. Vi ste objašnjavajući status socijalizma u bivšem Sovjetskom savezu i Jugoslaviji s pravom rekli da je okupacija izvana bitan faktor za Jugoslaviju, naravno okupacija, Prvi svjetski rat i tako dalje. Međutim, ako pretpostavljate, dakle to je sad strukturni problem u argumentu, čini mi se da je on ozbiljan i težak, ako pretpostavljate da je osnova za mobilizaciju i očuvanje socijalizma u Sovjetskom savezu bio napad izvana, dakle ako je mobilizacijska osnova bio patriotizam i nacionalizam u pozitivnom smislu, onda se moramo pitati da li je otpor prema Hitleru mogao biti moguć u Sovjetskom savezu na osnovi, recimo, parole spasimo svoju socijalističko društvo, socijalističku domovinu i tako dalje. Dakle, ako vi pretpostavite da je patriotizam i nacionalizam bio ta osnova, onda smo došli u situaciju gdje moramo priznati da je socijalizam kao vrijednost bio odvojen od nečega, od mnoga supstrata, i da je taj nacionalni supstrat zamijenio osnovu za održavanje društva. To je problem, ja mislim. Prema tome, kolaps socijalizma u istočnoeuropskim zemljama, računajući na ovaj autentični socijalizam kao što je ruski, to je sovjetski i kao što je na primjer jugoslavenski, ako smijem samo tako ekskluzivno to zadržati, jeste da je kolaps sistema vladanja koji je ujedno penetrirao i sistem života. Dakle, u tome je problem sa propašću toga socijalizma. Zbog toga mi nije jasna ova paralelizacija koju izvodite sa današnjim socijalističkim pokretima i bivšim pokretima. Ja sam tu malo skeptičniji u pogledu mogućnosti obnavljanja, jer stari socijalizam je bio sustav pod vlašću komunističkih partija. Novi socijalizam, socijalistički pokret su pokreti, dakle, pod vlašću socijalno prosvjetljenih, dakle, novih, recimo, subjekata. Ja bih tako rekao. Ne znam da li se slažete.
Well, I agree with much of what you said. The social movements the movement in South America today had been pushed from below upwards, and that's what makes them very exciting. But also I would say to you one other thing. Not a single Latin American country yet has capitalism been overthrown. So they are, if you like, the way I describe them, is a sort of sui generis form of social democracy. That they come to power, they push through massive reforms of the system, but capitalism is still there. And that's the big difference with what existed in Eastern Europe, Yugoslavia, the Soviet Union, or China. So I wouldn't, there's no direct comparison between that and what existed once before. But the battle in South America is not over, precisely because the social structure fundamentally has not been altered. Many, many reforms have been made, which are important structural reforms in some cases. Whether these will be enough, I doubt myself, to prevent, a defeat of some of these movements. I have to be honest here. I hope so, but I think they might have to go forward a bit more. The point I was making about the Russian Revolution and the Yugoslav Revolution was they were, it's true, there wasn't an organic development, there was outside intervention which pushed these countries and made it possible for the parties to take power. But then there's another interesting thing worth discussing, that how come that the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, which everyone thought was incredibly powerful, imploded, and the Communist Party of the People's Republic of China is still in power, albeit presiding over a very different social system. And here are some interesting points to be made. That the Soviet bureaucracy never really, the destruction of the leadership of that party physically, by the by the end of the 30s, 90% of the Central Committee of the Soviet Communist Party had been wiped out. And tens of thousands of people who had joined the party before 1917 had been killed, locked up, sent to the gulags, destroyed. So the party that was newly created after destroying these cadres was quite a different formation in many ways, and the level of education and intellectual achievement of the previous generation was lost to this. Then you had the development of a bureaucratic layer in the 60s in particular, which was quite uncouth and philistine in many ways, with no links at all to the tradition except to stay in power. And so by the time Gorbachev had come to power, there was no one he could depend upon to discuss any other way forward. And they collapsed. He found no one within the Communist Party except a handful of people and the party leadership who could discuss anything. And he turned to a network of neoliberal intellectuals, former dissidents who were completely obsessed and besotted with the American model. And they then said there's only one way forward, which is to become just like them and do whatever they ask. And so the Soviet system imploded without any serious discussion of what was going to take place. China was different. In China you had a party leadership that had been formed over 25 years of struggle, unlike the Russian party, which came to power very quickly. In China, 25 years of struggle created links between party leaders at the top level and at intermediary levels, which went very deep. And even during the crazy period of the Cultural Revolution in China, when many of them were disgraced, none of them were killed on the top level parties. And even while Mao Zedong was still in power, in his last days, he summoned Deng Xiaoping and said, we have to put something right. And so after Mao's death, these old generation of party leaders met. We now know this, the facts are published. And they said, how are we going to pull out of this economic mess? And they agreed as a collective, after lengthy discussions, the only way is to open the country up. It has dangers, we know, but is to open the country up and to transform it by the entry of private capital, but also by keeping a lot of control so the society doesn't disintegrate. And in fact, Deng Xiaoping said to Gorbachev, you are making a very big mistake the way you are doing this business. But anyway, that's your country, we can't advise you. So the Chinese decision to embark on this route, which has now made them the most powerful economy in the world, was carried out under the leadership of their Communist Party. How it will end, we don't know. But certainly that was the case. And that I didn't discuss in my lecture. But China is today the workshop of the world. The Chinese are in this very, very strong position, politically, socially, economically, and are seen as the big rival power. So we will see how that develops. You now have the largest proletariat in China. And I tell you a funny story. An old acquaintance of mine who's professor of history at Cambridge University was invited by the think tank of the Chinese Politburo to come and give a talk in China about 4 or 5 years ago. And he suggested some subjects he could speak upon. And they said, no, we will tell you what to speak on. That's what our interest is. And he said, okay, how did Britain avoid a revolution in the 19th century? When Britain was the workshop of the world and the British economy was booming. So he went and explained it to them. And he said, but just answer one thing. Was there any democracy in Britain at the time, when they became the pinnacle of the world? And he said no, and they burst out laughing. So they are people who think. We may not agree with them, I certainly don't, but they think of what they are doing, and that is a big, big difference between what happened in China and what happened in Russia, which was essentially old former members of the Communist Party nomenclatura becoming overnight millionaires by stealing property which had been the property of the public, buying it cheap, selling it dear. You all know that story. The Russian mafia capitalism are buying up properties all over Europe to make their money legal. It's a horrific story, and at a huge price paid by the people of that unfortunate country.
Evo imamo još 3 pitanja, to će biti, nažalost, naima već još 3 koje su se bili. Boris Boden.
I like very much your opening, this long durée perspective on more than one possibilities for socialism. However, I have a big problem thinking of a particular individual existence which is quite limited. And this is simply the question whether I would be able to live enough to see the second try of socialism. But there is another problem, I think, and this could be an objective one, objective limit for the next try of socialism. I would say this is the possibility that we underestimate the transformations done by neoliberal capitalism. How far, how deep these transformations are. Just to remind you, and you know this very well, remind you of famous words by Margaret Thatcher in '87 in Women's Magazine, there is no such thing as society. Well, this is the possibility that not only socialism as a particular social system, but society as such has gone, especially now in the age of Fordism, but after the end of industrial modernism, after the end of labor as a massive subject, also political subject, after the end of the possibility of the traditional modernist social political subjectification of social power, socialist power.
Well, look, Boris, I hope you're still alive when we have a second chance. I mean, I probably won't be. But I hope you are. You know, on one level, I'm tempted to say that the originality of history should never be underestimated. It always surprises you. There has never been an instance where people have been able to exactly predict how the world is going to turn out. So we don't know is the honest answer. We don't know. But I would very much, the neoliberal system has tried to break and destroy the solidarity amongst people, not just workers, that they did by deindustrializing and creating a system whereby you could borrow lots of money and buy what you want and get into more and more debt. It's not just that these countries did it, they encouraged their citizens to do it as well. And that has created big problems, that has created what we call the consumer society, that has led to a sort of, I would say, an officially encouraged stupefaction, stupidity. If you look at the television programs that go on all over Europe, every day, most of them are exactly the same, though spoken in different languages. Virtually the same. The same stupid questions, the same stupid gestures, the same stupid dances, sometimes even the same jokes that go on, and they have a purpose. Be happy. Don't think. And that used to be the MTV motto almost. Don't think, be happy. But now the problem for that model is that the don't think can only work if people really do feel it's okay. But when things are not okay, when you have a huge rise in unemployment, then it's a bit difficult not to think sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes then a thought goes, well, why is it that I can't find work? What's the problem? And different things happen. You had a struggle here in Croatia by students for a better quality of education. We have news in Britain, 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, the Middlesex University in London dissolved the entire philosophy department. So students occupy the university today. But when asked by the media, why did you dissolve the philosophy department? Because it has some of the most talented young philosophers there. The head of the university replied, it wasn't cost effective. Philosophy wasn't cost effective. But so these things are happening, we know. And the institutionalized apathy and passivity which the system tries to create, we know that, but it isn't always successful. And even if the old subject, which was considered absolutely necessary, the industrial working class, the proletariat, is no longer present in large numbers in Europe. It hasn't totally disappeared. But you have other layers which are coming into activity. In the public sector they can't do without. Immigrant workers, important now in virtually every major Western European country, who do work which no other workers will do. So new subjects are in formation. So one shouldn't give up on that. I don't think the system, which is in crisis now, has the capacity to make people feel that all is well indefinitely. And from that point of view, Greece is interesting. And people are watching what is going on in Greece, because you can't avoid it. I mean, they have to show some of it on television. as to what is going on, that, you know, this isn't just Zorba the Greek or a few dunces in Crete. It's actually a bit more serious than that. And it is forcing people to think. I mean, in the British general election, which ended day before yesterday, or yesterday rather, the headline of our largest tabloid newspaper was they did 4 pages on Greece, and they said this could be our future if you re-elect Labour. But you know, the thing is, it could be their future anyway. I don't think it will be, because Britain is deeply conservative mode at the moment. But that is what they're using, so they're worried. You know, what is the temperature in Greece? What is the disease, level of the disease? Will it spread like volcanic ash to other parts of Europe? What do we have to do to stop it? They're thinking about that. And the reason they're thinking is because people know what's going on. So I wouldn't think that they have succeeded. I mean, Margaret Thatcher said there is no such thing as society, but she was wrong.